This edition of MacVoices is supported by Smile, the makers of PDF Pen and PDF Pen Pro. PDF editing for your Mac, iPhone, and iPad. Learn more at smilesoftware.com. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, this time around, we want to review the Apple financial results for the quarter. That's one reason I'm wearing green, because it was a green kind of month. Apple made lots of money, defying Wall Street once again. And the guy that we always look to when we want to talk about financial results is Mr. Mark Fuccio. Mark, good to have you. I love the background.
Hi, Chuck. It's good to be here. And I guess after Zoom, Microsoft upgraded Skype so you can set background images. And I figured what's better than to have a long-term stock chart showing Apple's fiscal stock performance since the late 90s.
I don't believe it. I think that's just the chart you draw on the wall in your basement to keep up with your holdings. And you know what? Speaking of that, just before we start, full disclosure, folks, I'll let Mark speak for himself, but I have a small holding in Apple. It does not affect my opinions or anything because my opinions are always pro-Apple pretty much anyway. But it is a good idea just to let folks know that. Mark, I don't know if you want to review anything or just drive on.
Yes, I'm a long-term Apple shareholder, so I'm very pleased by its performance, obviously. And it was up 40 points last Friday, and I think today it was up almost $12, $11.53 a share. So it's done remarkably well.
Yeah, and we should say, just to put a little frame around this, that we're talking about this on Monday, August 3rd. So that, whatever happens by the time this comes out, you'll know where we were when we were talking.
Yes, indeed. So what can you say other than Apple truly had an exceptional quarter? And I think probably the most significant thing is that sales of Mac as well as iPads were up. On the phone call, on the earnings call, they mentioned that the iPad had its fastest growth rate in 8 years. So if you dial back 8 years, that was 2012. That was the year the Retina iPad was introduced. So at that time, a little trip back in history, iPad sales took off and went crazy, and then they start to go flatline and down. So it's great to see that that platform is picking up in sales again.
Mark, I feel like we can take a lot of messages out of the results, and we'll talk about some of them. But that particular one, should that have been a real surprise given the situation with education and with business as we have it right now?
So I think implicit in what you're saying is you're talking about changes in sort of the work at home, school at home trends because of the COVID-19 pandemic disease. So, I think for that, it probably should not have been a surprise that, sales of these two platforms had increased dramatically. I believe even at the end of last quarter, there was a little bit of mention that they're seeing sales of devices increase, and there are a little bit of capacity limited. So that clearly was again the case this quarter. So I think people are either looking for additional devices for themselves or the children to use, or they're looking to upgrade some of the equipment maybe that they're using. But either way, it translated into 21.6 revenue growth, for the Mac, and 31% revenue growth for the iPad. So truly stunning numbers.
Again, the Mac, one of the things that struck me about the Mac, the iPad seemed, if I had to guess or bet, I would think that would be a little more skewed toward the education market. And that's just an opinion. I have no basis for that. But the computer market, I think it says a lot about the fact that people decided to go to the Mac. Now, I don't know how Mac sales obviously compared with PC sales, or of whatever flavor PC you want to talk about. But the fact that Mac is in there and had such an amazing quarter, I think says that people recognize the value of the Mac and really, would prefer to go with that, or, entertain that as a serious option. And again, maybe I'm being an Apple fanboy and just saying, yeah, finally people are coming to their senses. But it just feels, I feels that way from the people I talk to that have invested in new machines.
I think it's not just you. I think for corroborating evidence, we could look into another company, Jamf, JMF, which makes device management software for Macintosh, iPad, iPhone, and that company went public in the middle of July. And if you read their their S1, their registration statement, they make a point of having 40,000 customers, 14,000 customers worldwide, of which they claim they've got about, if I recall correctly, 11,000 in the past 18 or 20 months. So I think that's significant for a couple of reasons. One, it clearly shows the adoption of Apple devices in IT environments, and Jamf is focusing on filling an IT device management need. Microsoft, VMware, others try to extend some of their tool set for managing PCs to manage Apple devices, but doesn't provide as good a user experience. But I think it's significant that this company was able to grow and go public, solely on the strength of being a service provider within the broader Apple ecosystem. Some of the other information that they share in their S1 had to do with relative IT efficiency. And in there, they claim that companies using, and I believe this data was sourced originally from IBM, but they're reporting that companies that are using Macs in their enterprise, have 1/6 the number of IT calls per device as they do for a Windows based device. So if you think about it, that means that in theory, if you switch everybody to Macs, you could do with maybe 1/6 the IT staff that isn't necessary in order to provide service. So I think that is certainly a reason that for 100 or 100, 150, maybe $200 a year, depending on service level, for Jamf software to manage a device, that's significantly less than what it would take to have a fraction of an IT person managing an Apple device. So I think it's clear that corporations are starting to see the benefits of using Apple equipment in place of traditional Windows-based systems.
Whenever we talk about some of this stuff, Mark, I realize, and folks, this should be a real clear here. This session is not going to be a Windows bashing session, not at all. I mean, we've done some of those, and I'm as guilty as the next guy. But this one, what Mark you're talking about are facts, and we've heard over the years just anecdotal story after anecdotal story about school districts and businesses that went from one to the other. And either saw their IT support staff requirements go up or down depending on whether they were moving to Mac or away from Mac. And this just seems to bear it out. I think that if certainly anybody that is buying a machine for themselves, they don't want to have lots of support, and they feel like the Mac they can do it on their own if it needs any support at all. And of course, now the other thing too is corporate IT departments are pretty much now being forced to require Macs because they're becoming so prevalent.
Yeah, well, I think support is really a big bucket of a term, and It's everything from problem solving to fixing a printer driver or installing a new printer driver, etc. And I think what Jamf, as well as there are other tools out there. I think there's another monitoring tool called Watchman Monitoring that are providing functions for remote management of Mac devices, and that makes it a lot easier to be able to do it remotely instead of having to have a body on site. And part of it is also just installing operating system updates and application updates and things. And we know that since the progression of the the Mac App Store, and its use for distributing OS updates as well as application updates, it's a very simple, very seamless experience. So I think that's part of what people are seeing. I must admit, it's been a while since about 2 years since I've done anything with a Windows machine, and I think if you look at some of Microsoft's results, they're clearly focusing more on their cloud services, and their desktop revenue is sort of flat to minorly up, and it seems to be mostly tied to refresh cycles of either hardware and associated version of Windows operating systems that go with it. So I think that's where it is. I think again the bigger, broader trend is that Apple is making progress into corporate America. It's not just the computer that people use when they're at home.
No, and this is not exactly corporate America necessarily, but it seems like I'm seeing so many reporters and so many different, I mean, both here, at least here in Pennsylvania, both local and the national, that if they're broadcasting from home or doing anything from home, there's a Mac sitting there somewhere, on their desks, whether it's a laptop or an iMac. And I just, I think it's interesting, that they even decide to put it that way, unless they position the camera that way, unless they think that makes them look busy or something. But it's clearly a nice advertisement for Apple that these people, however you feel about the press at the moment, but they're using the machine that gets it done.
That's true, and I think we're seeing so much of application are shifting more and more to be web-based. So at that point, pick whatever device, whatever browser you want to be using, and run with it.
I'm glad you brought that up because, I mean, like you mentioned Zoom earlier, even Microsoft Teams, so many of these things are running on both platforms now. And so what is the difference? Well, the difference becomes what requires maintenance, what's the most stable. We can argue security all over the place, depending on which side of the fence you happen to be on. But at the end of the day, it's not like you're having to make many, if any, compromises to run a Mac at home, and especially in this environment, that's even more important.
That's right, because the IT person invariably becomes yourself. It would be really interesting to talk to some corporate IT people in the Windows world to understand how they're responding, what they're doing in this COVID pandemic time period.
Yeah, the ones I've talked to, I mean, they're facing a lot of challenges because they need security seems to be the biggest concern. I mean that, or probably a bigger concern than productivity, because one breach can kill an awful lot of productivity very quickly. So they're fighting the VPN wars, and they're fighting the the encryption wars, and trying to make sure that somebody isn't just dialing into their office network, through an insecure line that has never had any security on it at all.
That's true, and then I think the other point of concern is devices switching between networks. So maybe on a home cable or DSL or fiber network, and that presents one set of exposure points. and then if it dials into the corporate network through a VPN tunnel or what have you, that needs to be locked down and protected to stop bad little bugs, from zoonotically jumping from one network to another.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I know this is supposed to be a financial research call report, but I mean, all these things kind of, I think, are part of the discussion about, where business is right now, where Apple is in relation to that business, and then where it's going to be in 3, 6, 10, 12 months. Because right at the moment, as we record this, it doesn't seem like COVID is slowing down anytime soon.
No, it doesn't. And if you look back at the broader environment, that company Logitech that makes the peripherals, its stock has basically been going up, since early April, once the market had its follow through day and turnaround after some of the original March shutdowns. So it clearly is part of this work from home, school from home trend. I've heard from different people on both coasts of the country that there's still difficulty in getting a decent webcam or a microphone. So that's another indication of what's going on with this trend.
MacVoices is supported by Smile, the makers of world-class software like PDF Pen and PDF Pen Pro. PDF Pen from Smile just keeps getting better. In version 12.1, they have added page-level support for documents with multiple pagination formats. What does that mean? PDF Pen now handles page numbering and body text numbering consistently, even when there's a mixture of Roman numerals and Arabic numerals involved. PDF Pen Pro also got a new capability in version 12.1 with the ability to modify page-level entries, ensuring page numbers displayed on thumbnails are correct and identical to the actual page number on the document. That's extra important if your document is tens or hundreds of pages long. And those are just the latest in an already exhaustive list of PDF editing features that include everything from the obvious text correction to securely signing PDFs, recording and playing back audio notations, document markup, optical character recognition of scanned documents, and so much more. There are flavors of PDF Pen available for Mac, iPhone, and iPad, so that you can do your work no matter where you are, no matter what device you are using. Right now, visit smilesoftware.com/podcast to find out more about PDF Pen and PDF Pen Pro, download demo versions, and do more with your PDFs. That's smilesoftware.com/podcast. And while you're there, discover what Text Expander can do to increase your productivity. Thanks to Smile for their support of MacVoices. Mark, what do you think would happen to some of these peripheral companies in every sense of the word peripheral? If okay, tomorrow COVID is over, we can go back to doing everything we could do. Do you think their stock prices are going to drop? Obviously they're going to see decreased sales because the market might be saturated to some degree. But do you think that would really hurt them that much? Or do you think that this is just part of a trend now that we're going to see because people have learned that they can work at home, businesses have learned that their people can work at home, and it's going to be a trend we see continue?
So let's separate that. I think there's two questions there. One is about peripherals, and then the other is about the broader trend. And I think the broader trend is here to stay. I've seen some research recently that indicates that only 20 or 25% of people want to get out of their home and go back to the office. So that's you look at that's the part of the glass that's half empty. If you look at the part that's half full, it's on the order of 70% of people want to continue to be able to work at home. So will we have a strict work at home regime like we do now? Or if we have something where it's a mixture where people work at home 2, 3, 4, 5 days a week, I wouldn't be surprised to see that, because I think some of the immediate benefits are you don't have to you drive, you don't have to fight rush hour traffic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And That seems to be a problem no matter where you are. Different geographic venues have different or worse traffic problems, but I think everybody appreciates the fact that if you don't have to drive to work, that that saves you probably an hour to 2 hours a day in terms of saved time. So I think that benefits like that I think will continue to provide some momentum. As far as what happens, to some of the stock prices of peripheral companies, that's hard to tell. It all depends on, number one, what is the overall market sentiment on psychology at that time? And then also, will people really stop, or will they just lighten up at the rate at which they buy these devices? Because the nature is that companies still do refreshes of computer hardware on a periodic basis. Every 3 to 4 years seem to be common time periods. So the sales won't go away entirely, but they may not continue at the frenzied rate that we've seen in 2020.
How about iPhones in this market? Apple, for once, iPhones were not leading Apple's sales results. So
they did, I guess, famously introduce in late March or early April, the small phone, the SE phone, and again on the call they credited that for having a very strong iPhone sale. So I think it is a combination of either people who like the smaller form factor, and people who like the lower price point. That clearly has moved forward. And revenue was up 1.7%, but since Apple doesn't disclose mix by model of a device, it's really hard to tell. My suspicion is that probably they saw large increase in unit volume of iPhones shipped, but they saw a transition to lower end, lower priced devices.
But we still, the iPhone market is still there. People still want an iPhone. They might want a lower cost iPhone. It might be that in this situation they decided, okay, I need to get a phone that's a little more current, but I can't afford to wait. I can't afford to wait until the fall for the new one, or early winter, whenever it's going to get here. But they still want to stay in the iPhone market, which I think is a really good sign for the refresh that will come later this year and moving forward.
Right. I think, as we know, the Apple environment tends to be very sticky, so people tend to use it. As an indicator of that is just look at the services growth. That is tied to all sorts of things like Apple Care, as well as music, video, and subscriptions, as well as iCloud for, I guess, backing up or sharing photos. So combination of all those things going up again is an indication of sort of how sticky the Apple environment is.
Yeah, it seems to be a silly thing to have to say, but you do have to point out that for a number of these Apple services, you have to be using an Apple device. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And so as the hardware goes, the services will go, and the services that don't run strictly on Apple hardware are just sort of an extra bonus to pull people into the ecosystem.
Yes. And, I think we'll have to see if there comes a point where the Apple Watch is completely disassociated from having to use it with an Apple iPhone. Because I think if they took that step, I think they'd see a jump up in watch sales as well.
Yeah, I would agree. And we know that that's coming at some point. We're just not sure exactly when, for connectivity reasons, if nothing else.
Right. That's right. So overall, it was it was a magnificent quarter, and I think now the race is on for when will Apple hit or cross at 2 trillion in market cap.
Yeah, well, again, today as we speak, it really did balloon somewhere around midday, maybe a little earlier. Because I looked at the price on my watch and went, that can't be right. Holy cow. I mean, the price you quoted earlier was the closing price for the day, but it had real intraday. I think it had gone up over 440.
So intraday, early in the day, it peaked and sort of looks like the first 90 minutes of trading or so. So,
Okay.
Yeah, so markets open 9:30, so that would have been like 11 o'clock your time. Yeah, that's the time you mentioned.
Yeah, that'd be about right. So before we just completely skip away from the financial call, the one other big piece of news, or maybe it's not a big piece of news, I took it as a big piece of news, is the 4-for-1 stock split.
Yes, it's been, 7 years since they last did one? 2012, I believe, and it's really a sign of they're making a statement of what sort of buyer they want for their shares. By splitting it 4-for-1, they'll bring the price back down to on the order of $100. And psychologically, a lot of people think, oh, Apple at $400, it's too expensive to buy it. But at $100, people think, okay, it's more affordable. It sort of reminds me of that old Yogi Berra, quote when he orders a pizza and they say, Yogi, how should we cut it? In 8 slices or 12? He says, oh, cut it into 8 because I'm not hungry enough to eat 12. So at some point, it's just how big each share is in terms of representing ownership of the corporation. So I was a little surprised to hear it, but it makes sense. It's consistent, I think, with what they announced last time, that they want to make the share price more affordable for people. Because again, I think somebody's there's a big perceptual difference between a $100 share versus a $420 share price.
And I've read a number of things over the weekend about this. Obviously, if you have 4 quarters or a single dollar bill, what difference does it make? It's still $1. But I think there is a difference. I mean, if I were to buy into Apple at, let's say, 10 shares at $400 per, it feels like there's a lot farther downside than if I buy in at 100. I mean, and I understand all the math is exactly the same. It doesn't change the value or anything, but I do think that psychological thing is a pretty big deal. At 100 shares or $100 a share, yeah, I think I'm a lot more likely to pick up a few shares than if I were to be able to pick up just 1 share or 2 shares of Apple or of any company. And then I look at some of the bigger tech companies and, their share prices have a comma in them. And it's like, well, that's crazy. I mean, I could lose a pile of money if they were to halve themselves. And yet the other part of my brain says, yeah, but if the stock price is 100, you could still be halved. It's just a matter of the math looking a little bit different.
That's true. But again, I think it's something about the way our psychology works that a lot of people are afraid of large numbers. 50%, a 10% loss on a share of Amazon is $300, right? Whereas a 10% loss on a $100 share of Apple would be only $10. So I think that's the terms people look at it, and they don't look at the percentage change. They look at the dollar change, and thus big numbers are scarier.
Mark Fuccio and I will be back with more discussion of Apple's quarterly financial results and what they mean, what we think they mean, both from the financial and the market perspectives. That's next time on MacVoices. Until then, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.